The train pulled into Harlow Creek, Texas, on a Tuesday morning so hot the air itself seemed to shimmer and apologize. Rancher Cole Hargrove stood on the platform with his hat pressed against his chest, not out of romance, but out of a vague sense that whatever was about to happen deserved at least a small measure of respect. He was 41 years old, had more acres than he could ride in a day, more cattle than he could count, and more money than a man could spend in 3 lifetimes. What he did not have, what the echoing silence of his 6-bedroom house reminded him of every single night, was someone to share the long, quiet hours with. That was why he had answered the advertisement. That was why he was standing on this platform, turning his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. He had expected someone ordinary. He had prepared himself for awkward silence, for polite conversation, for the mechanical beginning of an arranged life. What he had not prepared for was the woman who stepped off the last car of that train looking like she had survived something most people would not have. Her name was Clara Voss, and she was 29 years old. She wore a dress so worn and faded that its original color was a matter of genuine debate, somewhere between gray and the memory of blue. The hem was frayed. One sleeve had been stitched back together with thread that didn't quite match. Her shoes had a crack along the left sole, and she carried a single carpet bag so light it was obvious there was almost nothing inside it. Her hair had been carefully pinned, and that careful pinning told Cole everything. This was a woman who had almost nothing left, but had still taken time to try. Her chin was raised. Her eyes, brown and clear and startlingly direct, moved across the platform until they found him. She walked to him without hesitation, extended her hand, and said, "Mr. Hargrove. I'm Clara Voss. I apologize for my appearance. The journey was longer than I budgeted for, and I ran out of provisions 2 days ago. If you decide this arrangement isn't suitable, I understand completely. I won't make a scene." Cole Hargrove had negotiated cattle deals with men twice his size. He had survived droughts and floods and the kind of loneliness that carves a man hollow from the inside. But something in those 12 sentences hit him somewhere deep and unexpected. She had arrived starving, wearing what amounted to rags, with almost nothing to her name, and her first concern was making sure he wasn't inconvenienced. He didn't understand it yet. He would, in time. But right then, standing on that shimmering platform, he simply put his hat back on his head, picked up her carpetbag, and said, "You'll eat first. Everything else can wait." She blinked. Just once. And he thought he saw something flicker behind those steady eyes, something that looked like relief so profound it was almost grief. He had no way of knowing, as he led her to his wagon, that Clara Voss had spent the last 3 years holding a crumbling world together with nothing but her 2 hands and a refusal to quit. She had grown up in rural Ohio, the daughter of a farmer who believed education was a luxury and daughters were a burden. She had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, taught herself arithmetic from old ledger books she found in a neighbor's barn. When her mother died from fever, Clara was 17 and effectively alone. She worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a cook, whatever work she could find and hold on to. When the factory that employed most of her small town closed, the work dried up entirely. A neighbor woman had shown her the advertisement placed by a Texas rancher seeking a wife, a real partner, the ad had said, not just a housekeeper. Someone who wasn't afraid of hard work and wide open spaces. Clara had written back not because she was desperate for rescue, but because she was tired of surviving alone. There was a difference, and it mattered to her, even if she couldn't quite explain it to anyone. She wanted to belong somewhere. She wanted to be useful to someone who would notice. She had sold the last of her mother's silver to buy her train ticket and arrived with 63 cents to her name and no plan whatsoever if this didn't work out. What she did not know, what she was about to discover, was that the man driving the wagon beside her in companionable silence was also, in his own well-funded and outwardly successful way, completely lost. The ranch was magnificent in the way that places can be magnificent without anyone inside them bothering to notice. There were 3,000 acres of rolling Texas grassland, a house big enough to raise a family of 12, a kitchen with a cast iron stove that Clara stopped and stared at with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. Later he would learn it was love at first sight. The pantry was stocked because he'd had his housekeeper, old Mrs. Tremble, fill it before she retired to San Antonio to live with her daughter. There were boots lined up by the back door, 3 working dogs, and a photograph on the mantel of a woman who must have been Cole's mother, judging by the shared straightness of the nose. Cole made coffee and heated up a pot of beans and cornbread, and Clara ate with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned not to show hunger in front of strangers. But she ate everything, and when Cole wordlessly refilled her bowl, she looked up at him with those clear brown eyes and said, "Thank you," in a voice that carried the full weight of what she meant. After she had eaten, he gave her a tour of the house. She asked questions, practical, intelligent questions about the water source, the garden plot, whether the roof leaked in a particular corner she had noticed from outside, how many men worked the ranch and when they took their meals. She was cataloging, he realized. She was already figuring out how to be useful. It should have seemed transactional. Instead, it made something in his chest loosen just slightly, like a knot that had been there so long he'd stopped noticing it. That first week was a careful, respectful dance. Clara cooked, cleaned, organized the disaster of a filing system Cole used for his ranch accounts, and fixed a fence gate that had been dragging for 2 years because Cole kept meaning to get to it. Cole watched her, not in the way of a man evaluating property, but in the way of a man slowly becoming astonished. She never asked for anything. She never complained about the heat or the dust or the fact that the mattress in the guest room had a broken spring that listed you alarmingly to the left. She just quietly solved whatever problem was directly in front of her, then looked around for the next one. On the 4th night, he found her on the back porch after supper, looking out at the dark horizon with an expression that was not quite peace and not quite sadness but something threading between them. He sat down in the other chair without asking permission, and she didn't seem to mind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, because the silence felt like it had room for the question. She considered this with the seriousness she gave to everything. "I'm thinking that a person could be very happy here," she said. "And I'm thinking that someone hasn't been." He was quiet for a long time after that. The crickets were loud. One of the dogs settled heavily against the porch steps. Finally he said, "My wife died 6 years ago. Her name was Helen. She hated it here from the start, but she never told me until she was sick. Said she spent 15 years wanting to go home and never did." He paused. "I've been trying to figure out since then whether I was so blind I missed it, or whether she just never let me see it." Clara turned to look at him. "That's a very heavy thing to carry," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She turned back to the horizon. "I don't know how to be anything but honest," she said quietly. "I don't have the energy for pretending. I never have." "I believe you," he said. And he meant it. Those 2 hours on the back porch changed things, though neither of them spoke about that directly. Something had passed between them, a recognition, maybe. Two people who had both been quietly losing for a long time, each in their own way, suddenly sitting in the same dark and deciding together not to pretend otherwise. It was not romantic. Not yet. It was something more foundational than romance. It was the beginning of trust. 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, a man named Beaumont Driscoll came to call. Driscoll was a neighboring rancher, wealthy, silver-tongued, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes from never once having had to question your own value. He arrived unannounced on a Saturday, ostensibly to discuss a property boundary, but mostly, Cole would understand later, out of curiosity about the mail-order wife. Clara opened the door because Cole was out with the cattle. She offered Driscoll coffee and a seat in the parlor, because that was who she was. And Driscoll, with the casual cruelty of someone who had never once gone hungry, looked her over and said with a smirk, "So you're the charity case old Cole sent away for. I heard you arrived wearing practically nothing. Must be quite a step up, all this." He gestured broadly at the house. Clara set the coffee cup down on the side table with perfect composure and said, "I did arrive with very little, yes. I'm not ashamed of it. You're welcome to stay for coffee if you'd like, Mr. Driscoll, but I won't be sitting here while you speak to me that way." Driscoll laughed, surprised. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that." "I've had to," she said simply. When Cole returned and heard from one of the ranch hands what had happened, the man had been near enough to the open window to catch the exchange. He felt something shift inside him that he did not have immediate words for. It arrived first as anger at Driscoll, clean and righteous. But then it became something more complicated and less comfortable. He thought about the first day on the platform. He thought about how he had looked at her worn dress and cracked shoes and felt something he now recognized, with considerable shame, had been a flicker of doubt. Some small, ignoble part of him had briefly wondered if the agency had made a mistake, if she was perhaps too far down on her luck to fit into his life. He had fed her and been kind, yes. But he had also spent 3 weeks watching her prove herself before he had fully opened the door. Driscoll had said out loud what Cole had quietly let himself think for 10 minutes that first day, and the recognition of it burned. He went to find Clara in the kitchen, where she was peeling potatoes with the focused calm she brought to every task. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then said, "I heard about Driscoll." "It's nothing to worry about," she said without looking up. "Clara." Something in his voice made her stop and look at him. "I want you to know that I don't think that way. And if I ever made you feel, even for a moment, that what you arrived with mattered more to me than who you are, I'm sorry." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought he'd said the wrong thing entirely. Then she set down the potato and the knife, dried her hands on her apron, and said, "Mr. Hargrove. Do you know what I noticed the first day I arrived?" She didn't wait for his answer. "You picked up my bag. You didn't comment on it being light, or on my dress, or on anything about me that could have been used to make me feel small. You said I would eat first and everything else could wait. I knew then that you were a decent man." She held his gaze steadily. "I've been waiting for decent my whole life. It turns out it was worth the wait." Cole Hargrove, who had faced down storms and droughts and the slow death of grief, had absolutely nothing to say to that. He nodded once, turned around, walked out to the barn, and spent a few private minutes being quietly undone. That evening at supper, he told her she could redo the guest room any way she wanted, order whatever she needed from the catalog, and that he had been thinking they ought to visit the county clerk's office next week if she was willing. She looked at him across the table for one long, reading moment, then said simply, "I'm willing." They were married on a Thursday morning with no fuss and no guests except for 2 ranch hands who served as witnesses and old Doc Henley who came because Cole had invited him for breakfast afterward. Clara wore a dress that was neither borrowed nor blue. It was a deep green she had sewn herself from fabric Cole had brought home from town without her asking, leaving it folded on the kitchen table with no note because he had not yet quite figured out how to be openly tender. She had run her hand over that fabric for a long moment when she found it, and said nothing aloud. But she had made the dress in 3 days, and she had worn it like it meant something. Because it did. The years that followed were not a fairy tale. They were better than that. They were real. Clara expanded the kitchen garden into something that fed half the county in a drought year, organizing a quiet, unsentimental network of preservation and sharing that the ranching families around Harlow Creek relied on for 2 hard seasons. When a young widow named Addie Marsh lost her home in a fire with 3 children and nothing saved, it was Clara who coordinated shelter, clothing, and food, never announcing it, never accepting credit, simply solving the problem because it was in front of her. Cole watched his wife move through the world like water finding its level, quietly filling every hollow place she came across, and he understood with accumulating certainty that he was the luckiest man in Harlow Creek and possibly in Texas. He told her so one evening, years into their life together, sitting on that same back porch where they had first spoken honestly into the dark. The ranch was larger now. There were children, 2, a boy and a girl, asleep inside. The dogs were older, and there were new ones. The broken fence gate had been fixed so long ago it was almost a memory. You know, Cole said, when you stepped off that train, I saw the dress and the bag and I thought, for about 10 seconds, that I might have made a mistake. Clara turned to look at him with an expression that was mostly amusement. I know, she said. He blinked. You knew. Of course I did. I can read a person's face, Cole. I've had to be able to do that my whole life. She leaned back in her chair. But then you picked up my bag. And you said I would eat first. And I thought, 10 seconds of doubt isn't a character flaw. It's just human. What matters is what a person does next. He reached over and took her hand, the way he had learned to do without making a production of it, and she let him hold it the way she had learned to do without deflecting. Outside, the Texas night was enormous and full of stars, and somewhere in the distance one of the cattle lowed low and long across the dark. What Cole Hargrove had learned, across all those years, was something he tried once to explain to his son and failed, and tried again to his daughter and almost got right. It was this, that worth is not something a person carries in their luggage. It is not in their dress or their shoes or the lightness of their bag. It is in the 10,000 small choices a person makes when no one is watching, to keep going, to stay honest, to pick up someone else's burden without being asked, to raise your chin on a train platform in a worn-out dress and refuse to be ashamed of surviving. He had almost missed her. He had stood on that platform for 10 seconds and almost decided that what he saw on the outside was the whole story. The whole story, as it turned out, was the greatest gift he had ever been given. And it had arrived, like all the best things do, without warning, a little worn, a little tired, carrying almost nothing. And worth more than everything he had.